Louise asked me to start the recording. Okay. Okay, so beginning the process, you have a little bit of information now about what cognitive coaching is. You have a little bit of understanding that it's focused on the cognitive strategies that we use when we're in a situation of coaching or working with someone. And we also understand that there are specific questions and different types of questions that we can ask depending upon whether we're having a planning conversation or depending upon whether we're having a reflecting conversation. Reflecting conversations they obviously occur after you've had an observation or you have observed something going on in the classroom. The planning conversation occurs prior to your observation in the classroom. So things that we want to think about when we're having a planning conference with a candidate or a teacher, we want to clarify the goals and the objectives of the lesson that we're going to observe. We want to kind of understand what teaching strategies the teacher is going to be using and what decisions they're making about why they chose those particular teaching strategies. We also want to understand what types of evidence we'll be looking for that are going to tell us that the students are learning. And then what process is going to be used for the collection of the evidence during the lesson. So what is the teacher going to do in order to know the students are learning? Is she going to observe? Is there going to be some obvious signal that the students are going to demonstrate? Is she going to be checking for understanding? What is the process that she'll be using in order to know that the students are learning? So I'm going to stop share for a moment and ask you to go back into your Edmodo folder. And in your Edmodo folder, you will find a document that says CC Planning Conversation. Go ahead and click on that, open that document.
That one's not working for me as well.
Not me either.
Wow, this is very interesting. Yeah, I can't seem to open it either. I wonder if it has something to do with Edmodo. Okay. Okay, I have the document open on my desktop, and I'm going to screen share it with you now. And we'll just look through it quickly. So again, this is a breakdown of the kinds of questions that you could ask in a planning conversation. So starting with simply describe the lesson, including its purpose. So your intention is to help the teacher clarify the purpose of the lesson. I work with new teachers a lot of time, and especially with pre-service teachers who sometimes aren't always clear on what their lesson objective is. They know what they're going to teach, and they're aware of the content, right? But they're not always clear on what their lesson objective is. What is it they want the students to be able to demonstrate at the end of this lesson? So it's really important to spend some time clarifying the purpose of the lesson and talking about what the lesson objective will be. So you're clarifying what is the lesson going to be about. You're going to ask questions about what is the sequence going to be in the lesson? What's going to happen first? What will you be doing first? And then. And so it gives you an understanding of what you're going to see as you observe the lesson. Does the teacher have a clear understanding of how to sequence this lesson? And if so, does the sequencing make sense instructionally? Are the students able to follow along with the sequence of the lesson? What's the timing like of the lesson? Is the lesson long enough for the teacher to actually cover all of the content? And when we think of timing, we also think of pacing. What's the teacher's pacing like during the lesson? I think we talked about that in one of the lessons that we saw in our last session, where we observed the teacher in the lesson. Pacing was very, very brisk, but the students didn't seem to have any difficulty following along. And as the lesson is occurring, what is the teacher doing to monitor student progress? What are you hearing this teach? What are the things that the teacher is saying? Is she asking questions? Is she checking for understanding? And what are the things that the students are doing during the lesson? Are they asking questions? Are they checking for understanding? Is this lesson a reciprocal lesson between the students and the teacher, or is it just simply teacher directed? And then lastly, what kinds of data collecting is occurring? What do you see happening? What kind of data might I collect to assist you? You might even ask the person that you're observing. And then you always close with a very broad, open-ended question like, was this conversation helpful to you? If so, then I can grow as your coach. So you're creating that reciprocity that you need. You're creating that autonomous relationship and the ability to work interconnectedly, as we learned about in the 5 states of mind, that sense of holonomy. So that's what the very first planning conversation looks like. I'm going to go ahead and stop the sharing now, and I'm going to once again attempt to open another web page. This one is of the planning conference that you're going to observe, and this is on a YouTube video, so hopefully this will play without any problem. I'm going to have to close up some of these other documents, sorry.
Ron, I can't hear the conversation.
Likewise.
Nor I.
Same here.
Yeah, me neither.
Okay, we'll give that another try. Okay, let's start the video again, and just give me thumbs up if you can hear it as you're watching.
Hi, Nicole. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you today, Jordan?
Very good. I'm going to observe your Math 8 on-level class. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
And what will your lesson be about today?
We'll be looking at discovering the Pythagorean theorem, so students will look at the 2 legs and seeing how they can get to the hypotenuse.
Okay. And what are the objectives for your lesson?
For the students to understand Pythagorean theorem and how it is created, that will help them solve for the hypotenuse in a right triangle.
As you see the lesson unfolding, what do you see yourself doing during the lesson?
I see at the very beginning having a lot of kind of direct instruction, putting out some ground rules, because we'll be doing some cutting and pasting, so I don't want them to make their own cut. So I'll go step by step kind of with them, and then kind of give them some time to discover on their own, and then help, those other students help aid others that are still trying to figure out the pattern.
Okay. And how do you see the lesson being carried out? So from start to finish, how do you see the lesson going?
In the beginning, doing some recap on vocabulary that we learned from yesterday. So right triangle, what is a leg? What is a hypotenuse? What is a right triangle? What makes it a right triangle? So first going over that, and then kind of going over the ground rules for cutting, scissors down until I say cut, and things like that. And, making sure we have all the materials first. Then going into me kind of showing them step by step where to cut, what to draw, what to paste, when to paste, me kind of doing the first few steps with them. So first cutting up our 2 squares together off the side legs, then allowing them to explore on their own to create their 3rd square with the other 2 square areas of the other sides. That will end up creating a perfect square on the hypotenuse leg.
Okay. And how will you close the lesson?
I'll go over some questions with them and probing questions to get them to kind of do some higher order thinking, asking them, well, what is the formula for area of a square? Well, it's side squared, so that's our a squared. That's how we figured that out. Then what was for the 2nd square? Well, we're going to call that our b squared. Well, then when we took those 2 areas and mix matched them and created the new square off the hypotenuse, they could see that that was the sum of them. So putting them together, adding them up, created another side squared. And then going from there, probably doing a quick exit ticket so they can, tell me in their own words, how is Pythagorean theorem created in your own words, and why does it work?
It's a great idea. How long do you see each part of this lesson taking?
Probably about 5 minutes for the vocabulary to recap, so for refreshing, make sure they know what we're talking about. And then 15 minutes going into the cutting and pasting, and then, another 15 for conversation of, what is Pythagorean theorem, then what can it actually look like, and how is it created with actual a squared plus b squared plus c squared. And then probably another good 5 minutes at the very end to give them time to answer their exit ticket, so I can have more of that kind of feedback of where they are and what they understood for the day.
And how will you be using that feedback that you're getting from the students?
I'll look at it when they leave, and I'll use that to figure out how to start the day the next day.
Mm-hmm.
So right when they come into class, what do I need to go over? Do I need to clarify anything further? Or are they ready to go and start using it? So I'll be able to kind of gauge where each of the students are and maybe which students I might recommend for the week to come into tutorials as well.
Great. And what will be an indicator for you how the students are doing? Like, what's the indicator that they have successfully grasped the Pythagorean theorem?
I'll first want to see them be able to notice the 2 areas cut up of the leg squares will create that whole square off of the hypotenuse. So hopefully seeing the aha moments and like, oh, how cool, and getting excited about that, kind of their comments there and seeing them. But then I think, just going over the probing questions, all of us together, getting them to do some higher order thinking, that's going to show me kind of immediately what they're thinking and if they are clicking with it quickly or not. But then the exit ticket, I think, is going to give me the most formative kind of assessment to see where they are.
Mm-hmm. If I were to come observe your classroom, what should I look for?
Probably seeing a lot of kind of me doing some instruction first, more direct instruction, then leading into the students on their own, and then the students kind of flipping the classroom around to where they're helping one another, not necessarily me helping them as much. So, they're helping one another discover, and that hopefully you'll be able to see the students learning on their own towards the end after I've backed off a little.
Great. And do you need any help or assistance from me? Can I do anything to help out?
Just probably look at how I'm presenting the lesson, making sure that I'm engaging them and, making it flow correct or properly to where their attention still, they're not getting ahead of me, but they're also not getting behind me. Just kind of making sure I'm flowing at the right pace. That would be helpful.
Okay. I will get that feedback to you, and I look forward to meeting with you again. Thank you for reading with me today.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to see you tomorrow.
Hi, Nicole. How are you doing today?
Good. How
Okay, I hope you're all able to hear that fairly well. Just thumbs up. Did it go better the second time than it did the first time? Good. Okay, good. So let's just do a debrief. What did you notice about that interaction between the coach and the coachee, or the mentor and the mentee?
I didn't like how, I don't know if we're doing what we like, what we didn't like, but I love the questions and they seem to go along exactly with what you were talking about, but the coach seemed completely disengaged and not interested at all in what the mentee, the teacher was actually saying. It didn't seem genuine at all, unfortunately.
Okay.
I want to add on to what Sandra was saying. Even though it felt like the coach was disengaged and that the questions were very scripted, I still felt like the information that was elicited was very valuable. So even maybe they're supposed to be closed off like that. I don't know, but I thought what she got from the teacher was good.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like some of the feedback for the teacher could have been a little bit different. Like, I know that it was supposed to be a new teacher, but if we're thinking about the context of the classroom, I think she said it was 8th grade. And what caught me was like talking about how to use scissors for 8th graders. It's kind of like, I don't know you need to spend a bunch of time like, okay, then you put your scissors down and then you do this and this is with the scissors. And it's like, I don't know if the girl was just nervous on the video, but it was kind of like being aware of the classroom and kind of guiding, like, you don't necessarily have to spend all this time going step by step about everything, and kind of coaching, like feeling comfortable about how to actually deliver the lesson, not so much about the focus of the structure of the lesson.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think she meant that she was going to teach them how to use the scissors. I think she was just concerned that they would be ahead of her and cut the wrong stuff. So I think she was more talking in that aspect about getting them to do the assignment correctly. And so having been through these conversations, it seemed like the coach was new and really just using the script. I agree with that. It was awkward to me, and I think the coach seemed disengaged, like Sandra said. But I also think what Michelle said about getting the teacher giving good responses. The point of the conversation, I think, is for her to be reflective. And I would have actually liked to see the coach ask a few more probing questions, like after follow-up questions, I guess, to get her to reflect a little more, because it felt like she maybe wasn't really even thinking through it. She just told her what she was going to do, as opposed to really thinking about what the kids would be doing. And I don't know, I just didn't feel like she was really prompted to think about anything new from the conversation.
Aside from what you observed the coach doing, what did you notice as the conversation transpired? This was a 6-minute and 26 or 25-minute conversation. What did you notice about the teacher from the beginning of the conversation to the very end of the conversation?
To me, it seemed like her questions or her answers were already thought out. Like she knew the conversation was going to be occurring and had a list of questions and how to answer them. I found it interesting that she wasn't like referring to her lesson plans or her outline and saying, oh, okay, yeah, here is going to do this. So, other than the fact that it just seemed really scripted to me. For me, it was good to see how the whole thing could take place and how you could have those pre-observation conversations.
Looked like she actually had notes on her phone because she was scrolling through her phone as she was talking. And about halfway through, she quit doing it. It seemed like she became a little bit more natural. But at the very beginning, looked like she must have had a PowerPoint or some kind of notes on her phone.
Oh, thank you, Dorinda. I didn't notice that.
No, I didn't. But I think too, I felt like the teacher got more and more confident as it went on, and it was causing her to think, and she got more comfortable with sharing her ideas kind of deal, or sharing how it was going to go. I think the questions led to her being able to have to think about it just more and more.
Would you say that the depth of her responses increased as the conversation went on?
I would.
Mm-hmm. I would agree.
I'm glad you said that because you are correct. And that's what we're striving for here, the kind of conversation that, although it may have felt scripted to you, I think, I don't disagree with some of your observations. I think my attention was more drawn to the responses of the teacher herself. I did notice her become more relaxed about halfway through the conversation. And I did notice the depth of her responses. You can actually observe when people are thinking more deeply, because sometimes their eye gaze will go upward, and they'll actually kind of give you a kind of a signal or an impression that they are thinking more deeply. And I saw that occur with this teacher. Although some of you may have felt it was scripted, I think that she, as she got further into the conversation, became more reflective. And that's really the goal. Did you notice who was doing most of the talking?
Teacher.
The teacher was doing most of the talking. And so you want to ask questions that are going to encourage the person that you're coaching to reflect on their own practice. So in order to do that, you have to sometimes follow a script, right? You have to ask the right question. But you can see that it actually does work, because the person responding to the question will have to think about what they were doing or what they were hoping to accomplish or achieve in their work. So I think this, although perhaps you saw it a little differently than I did, I think this 5-minute or 6-minute segment actually was a good example of how, with the right questions, we can lead our coaches to better responses and more reflective thinking. Okay, I went into Edmodo using my iPad just now, and I noticed that some documents will open and some will not. So what I'd like you to do next is go to the document that says Cognitive Coaching Reflective Questions, and open that document for me, and then let me know if it's working.
It's working.
I opened it.
For me.
Okay, great. I am very pleased to hear that. So I'm going to go back to our PowerPoint real quick here. And now that we've observed the planning conversation, we're going to actually observe a post conversation. And again, what you're going to see is you're going to see two teachers having this conversation. Perhaps your focus won't be so much on the teacher asking the questions, but it will be on the teacher giving the responses. I believe the pacing of this is a little more brisk, so you might have to really listen carefully. But again, we're going to be thinking about, what is the teacher's understanding of the lesson? What did the teacher observe the students doing during the lesson? What was the evidence of student learning? And what will the teacher do with the evidence that was collected? And obviously, what are the next steps? So we're thinking about, again, the teacher's reflection upon what she taught and what she observed, and then what's she going to do with that information? I'll be very honest with you. I've observed a lot of lessons, and sometimes when I'm in a classroom observing, I will see something very different than the teacher believes that they taught. And that is because in the act of teaching, you're very focused on delivering content. And sometimes you're less focused on what's really happening in the classroom. So it's interesting to be on the other side of the situation when you're having a post-conference with a teacher and you're asking questions based upon what you saw, and their responses sometimes are not what you saw. So it's important to develop the kinds of questioning strategies that are going to help you have them reflect a little bit more deeply in order to maybe find some find the common experience that you both shared. So I'm going to exit from this. I'm going to move us into YouTube again, and I'm very hopeful that this will work. And I hope the sound won't be a problem this time.
We were talking about doing more hands-on math.
Okay, I'll back up just a little bit. I think we missed a few seconds there.
More hands-on math. How did it go?
This week we actually were learning about tens and ones. So we did an activity where they actually used manipulatives of rods and they were able to, basically I would give them a number, like let's say for example 15, and then they had to represent using the rods, like the tens and the ones, and then they had to explain, you know, how many tens that they had. They would say like one, I have one group of tens, and how many ones, and say that the number was 14 for ones. So we did that for about maybe 10 minutes using the manipulatives. And then after what they did, they created, using construction paper, they had a set of rods drawn, and they had to use the first letter of their name, and they had to create, you know, in a capital letter of their name. So let's say, for example, if it was like Nicolas, he did the capital N, and then on a paper they had to say, my name begins with the letter N. I used 3 tens, 0 ones. Therefore, I have, you know, 30. My number is 30, or the answer was 30. So I thought that was really good because they really got into it. They were engaged. They pretty much the whole class understood what tens and ones meant. So yesterday, actually, we still continued using dice. So they would roll a pair of dice, and they had 2 like lines with the plus sign equal. So they would say, okay, let's say when they rolled the dice, one was a 6, the other one was a 3. So on the tens, they would write a 6, and then on the ones a 3, and then they would say, I have 6 tens and 3 ones. So my answer is 63. And it worked out because, especially like my intermediate and advanced group, they got it really quick. So I just had to work in a small group with the beginners.
It sounds like you really took a lot of risk with your planning, and your kids were really engaged and benefited from it. How might you account for the high level of engagement that you seem to have seen?
Meaning like, how did I feel about it? Like, I felt really good because I didn't see anyone who was like lost or saying, I don't know. The good thing, I paired them up in partners too. So it was really great to have, you know, someone else to work with and help out one another. So like, yesterday I had, the day before when we actually learned about the tens and one, I had 3 students absent. So yesterday when they were here and we did it with the dice, I had students who offered and said, I can teach them. Like I can be their partner and I can help them out. And it worked out really well because those 3 students that were actually out, they actually understood it because once I talked to them, they said, hey, I get it. I know how to do it. So it helped me not to have to reteach the lesson or, you know, have to teach the lesson, you know, all over to those students. It was just easier to have other students who actually understood it and they offered to teach it to them. So I just had to focus with just my beginners who are just struggling, and which worked out well too because I had them in a small group and it was, you know, interaction between me and the 5 students that I had with me. So
It seems like you're really using data to drive your instruction and really forcing your children to take their own ownership of their learning. What are some of the things you think you did that made this lesson go so well?
Of course, planning. I had to just, you know, make sure like before I was going to teach the lesson, like what was something that would be fun. And I got the idea actually from Miss White and Miss Silva, which was great, but I just added a little bit more where before we actually did the, you know, where they had to do their capital, their first name of their, you know, the first letter of their name. I wanted them to first be exposed to using the manipulatives so they can understand it. I taught first a mini lesson, then we went as a whole group, they were just working on using the manipulatives. So that worked well, so I thought that was good. And then just to do a follow-up yesterday where I wanted to make sure that they really understand this, so I just decided, let me do a different game. Especially like in math, I always like to do more like hands-on and things that are fun that they can use, you know, like dice or any other types of manipulatives that I feel that they're going to be more engaged and they're going to understand it better than just, you know, watching me just write something on the board and then they're just writing the answers. So I think that's what helped is the fact that I'm planning ahead and thinking what would be fun for them. And yeah, it was great. I mean, they loved it. And when we did even yesterday when we did the warning warm-up and I gave them 2 questions, I mean, they were just like, oh, this is easy. They were like easy breezy, you know, so which was good because I mean, the majority of the class, they said, yeah, they got it.
So it sounds like you're really collaborating effectively with your peers.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop there. Let's think for a moment about what we noticed the teacher doing in this lesson, and we'll just take a moment to reflect on that. So, what did you notice the teacher doing?
She did most of the talking.
Okay.
I think it was a lot more for summarizing the lesson and provided a lot more authenticity for me.
Okay.
I felt like there wasn't that much metacognition going on about when she specifically asked her, well, why do you think the students were so successful? She turned it around to be, I was happy with it. I felt good about that. And I really didn't feel like it was necessarily addressing those questions or the depth of those questions.
Great.
Agreed.
Yeah, I completely agree with that too. I noticed that she was saying more about what she saw the students doing instead of reflecting on why they were doing or how they were doing it. And I also noticed that the coach was asking a question but didn't seem to guide her back when she asked a specific question, and the teachers kind of got off task a little bit and she didn't bring her back. So I don't feel like she got an actual answer to 2 or 3 of her questions.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking when we were watching it that it would have been interesting to have the pre and the post would be with the same teacher, because oftentimes it's nice, like you were saying earlier, that sometimes the lesson that you observed is not the lesson that the teacher thought that they were teaching. So it would be interesting to hear what the teacher planned to do and then their reflection afterward, and did they really achieve what they were hoping to have achieved.
Yeah, I agree totally, Julie. I did try to look for a pre and a post of the same lesson, and I didn't really find what I was looking for on YouTube. I agree with what you've said. I thought it's interesting the contrast between Doug's comment and Michelle's comment, because sometimes we expect teachers to be able to summarize what they've taught, and there's nothing wrong with that, because at least they understand what they taught and the sequence of instruction. They're clear on what their lesson was going to be about, and they followed their plan, right? And that's a good thing to know. But we also want them to be able to go a little deeper in their thinking, and we want them to reflect on not just how the lesson went, but what was the experience like for the students? Were the students learning? How do you know they were learning? I think this was a good example of that. This teacher was very comfortable talking and very comfortable reflecting, but it was at a very kind of a superficial level. She was talking about what she did, and we don't even know if that person who was acting as the coach saw this lesson, right? There was really no indication that perhaps she did or she didn't. She had questions that she was asking about the lesson, but she didn't seem to come up with any probing questions or any other questions that might have suggested that she had seen something in the classroom that she wanted to explore more deeply. So it's important, as you watch these examples of what cognitive coaching can be like, that you understand the importance of asking the right kinds of questions. And then there's also the part where you need to know the person that you're working with well enough to know, is this a teacher that likes the summary level of everything, that they're really good at recall information, or is this someone I need to push a little bit to go more deeply in their thinking? And and that's a skill that you need to develop as a coach as well. Any other observations?
Yeah, I did notice when she when the coach would like rephrase or make a statement about something that she said, that again, very surface level, the teacher would just kind of go off onto a different, like she wasn't making the connections to what the coach was saying to her.
Right. She was answering the questions the way she wanted to answer them, right? And
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Ben.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, it also kind of, because I've taught the 10s and 1 lessons, and it's like she's not giving the kids that deeper understanding of really what 10s and 1s is. So I don't know if that kind of goes with her observation of just keeping it really at a basic level instead of really digging into that deeper understanding. Because it's not just knowing that it's 1 10 and 5 1s. It's, how does the 10 frames look, and really digging into all that. So it kind of, maybe that's where her base is. I don't know. I don't know if it ties together. That's just...
Well, and then again, it's the responsibility of the coach to ask a question like, well, what does working with 10s and 1s, how does that help your students understand place value? So that way, when you ask the question, the teacher has to reflect on what's the conceptual knowledge that the students are getting out of this lesson. They're able to identify 10s and 1s, and that's great, but what's the purpose of that? So it's asking the right question to follow up a response that's not deep enough. And again, that's a skill that you practice, as Lisa will perhaps share with us at when we meet next week. What's the experience of being in a training program where you're really thinking about cognition and you're thinking about metacognition on the part of the person you're talking to? What skills do you need to have as the coach or the principal or the teacher leader to get that person to that place? That's an important question and a skill that you really need to develop. Any other thoughts about cognitive coaching? Okay, so I shared those with you because we talked about cognitive coaching in class. I want you to understand that cognitive coaching is one method. It is not the only method, but it is one method that you can use to have really great conversations when you are working with teachers, either as a coach or as an administrator. It deepens the level of practice for both the person asking the questions and the person answering them. And it really encourages that metacognitive practice that we want teachers to be engaged in when they're thinking about planning their lessons. So again, moving from cognitive coaching, obviously there are other forms of mentoring that exist in schools, and mentoring that occurs between either teachers with other teachers or administrators with teachers. And so I asked you a few questions about that, but we're thinking about, what does mentoring look like? Does mentoring look the same for all teachers? Is it always about content or coaching? Is it more about mentoring and the experience of building that person's self-efficacy so they can be more confident in their ability to deliver content? Do all student teachers or all new teachers have the same needs? Of course they don't, right? Every person is different. We're thinking about what kinds of systems that we have in place to address the needs that that particular teacher candidate or teacher has. And then we're thinking about how successful we are at retaining these high quality teachers, especially new teachers. This is an interesting time. I just have been reading a lot on this topic. I'm going to share what I have discovered, but before I do that, I want you to see the results of the survey that we took just a moment ago. So let me just try to bring that up for you. Hopefully that will cooperate with us. Okay, so let me just share this with you. Okay, can everyone see my responses or your responses to the summary? So these are the questions that we responded to. The first question: in my organization, new teachers, intern or in service, receive the support of a coach or mentor at the first day of service. 13 of you said yes, 5 of you said no. It's interesting, we have a lot of intern teachers right now, and we'll probably have even more this coming school year because we are not quite able to produce enough teachers for all the jobs that are available. But we do see a pattern here. This is about 75%, almost 75% of schools offer some kind of mentor or coach right at the beginning of that person's service to the district. Does anyone want to share an experience or something that they've noticed about that?
I know my sister is the head of BITSA for a district down in San Jose.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have a lot of conversations about BITSA. But I know one thing she was saying is, some providers are really helpful, but they're really struggling with those teaching positions that are very specialized, and finding people who are, A, want to put the time in, and B, are good providers. So I think you can even have one program and have different experiences.
I think you're right there, yes.
So I personally didn't go through BITSA because I was at a private school, but I think there's challenges within BITSA and the mentoring program just with a lot of the specialized positions out there.
And those hard to fill positions like mathematics and science and special education continue to be challenges for the state. They have been for decades. We've changed the requirements for special education teachers, thinking that we could produce more of them by lowering the standard and essentially saying you don't have to have it. It used to be that to be a special ed teacher, you had to have a multiple subject credential first, and then you could qualify for an ed specialist credential. That no longer is the case. You can get an ed specialist credential without having been a classroom teacher, which we believe, at least the research is suggesting now, that was a big mistake, because we have a lot of people who are not quite competent to be in specialist roles when they've not had enough classroom teaching experience. So we struggle with that in the state. We struggle with those positions. How about the next question? In my organization, new teachers are assigned to a coach or mentor by the school administrator. It looks like most of you, your experience has been that the school administrator assigns the match between the mentor and the mentee. Is that a good practice, do you think?
I think if you know the people and you know their personalities might work well and they can learn from that person, yeah, but I don't know. If you haven't watched and observed somebody and their style of teaching, sometimes it doesn't always, they can clash. So I think you just got to be really careful with that, in my opinion.
And as a BITSA coordinator for my district, it's been really interesting because every site administrator has a different take on it. Some administrators mandate that they want the mentor to be, or the support provider to be, from actually a different site. And that's actually been a really interesting thing for me to see, because the growth and the kind of cross-pollination of the two different high schools versus having somebody in their department do it, and the problems that can ensue. So it's been interesting to see the different models at the different sites.
At my school, we do actually 3 different things. We have an administrator assign a mentor to a new teacher. The teachers also on their own tend to find their own mentors as well, people in their department or whatever that are working with them. And then also we have a special group or something that meets periodically, I think maybe once a month or so, with an administrator, and it's all the new teachers together, so they're meeting collectively and individually.
Great observations. It's great to see that school districts are invested in making these matches. And sometimes the new teacher is an unknown entity, right? Sometimes you don't know a lot about that person or their learning style or their personality, but you do know the coaches that you have access to in your school district or in your school. And sometimes you can make good matches. I've seen it work really well both ways. Sometimes it works well for the administrator to make the match, and other times, sometimes it's not been a good fit. And sometimes things happen. You have to kind of come up with solutions to make things better. New teachers are required to participate in BITSA in California. BITSA is the predominant method for teachers to clear their credentials, and that we call that induction in the state of California. BITSA, or induction, is not required in every state. And sometimes we do have candidates who come from out of state who have not taught for a year or two and who are required to go through at least 1 year of BITSA or coaching support. BITSA models can vary tremendously, although they use the same materials usually, but they can vary quite a bit. Veteran teachers act as informal coaches or mentors to new teachers. This somewhat depends upon where you are and what you teach, right? Some grade level teams are very welcoming, and they welcome a teacher in and they support that person. And depending upon what you teach, you might be a special education teacher. You're the only one at the school, or you have very few other colleagues that are working in the same type job that you are. So it's harder to find the right kind of match. New teacher coaching happens weekly. It looks like for most of you, or at least 2/3 of you, 66%, 3% said always, and 3 said never. So 16% rather. So it can vary quite a bit. Obviously, there are complications in any job where you may miss a week, but the BITSA model does require, is it 1 hour or 2 hours a week of coaching? I think, is it 1 hour? Veteran teachers can also request coaching. Interesting, this is sometimes occurs, it looks like for half of you, and always to never occurs. Well, that's kind of an interesting spread of data. Actually, if we combine sometimes and never, we would kind of get the impression that it's not happening very much. But, you know, depending upon the situation, if you have coaches, instructional coaches in your school district, then maybe you have access to people that you can go to when you want coaching. In some school districts, you only get assigned a coach if you're a veteran teacher, if you've been referred to PAR. And PAR is peer assistance and review. So it just depends upon the district and what services or what they have available. Someone want to comment on that?
Yeah, is it not, maybe it's just my district, but I thought it was sort of the state BITSA program. So maybe Michelle can correct me, but I thought that you could always do voluntary PAR and it wouldn't go on your record, like as PAR, as being put into PAR if you wanted coaching as a veteran teacher. Am I incorrect?
I think it depends upon where you are and what your contract says. So in some situations, your district may voluntarily offer you PAR if you have an unsatisfactory evaluation. Or if you are in a change of jobs situation, let's say you're going from teaching in a classroom to being a special ed teacher, and you've just recently received that credential and you're changing jobs and you need the support of someone, you could request that you have a mentor or a coach. That might be a more experienced special ed teacher who's going to work with you. It just depends upon what your district can offer you. Sometimes they'll pay and sometimes they won't. Go ahead.
Our district is really using our instructional coaches for those veteran teachers. So it's not part of BITSA, but it's part of the instructional coach model that we have in place for the district. And they're highly encouraged. Principals will oftentimes write it into veteran teachers' goals to use those coaches.
Good, that's great. So they actually write it into their evaluation that they need to work with an instructional coach? Great.
Yeah, we're having the same experience with our site coaches as well. So they're putting it in the evaluations.
Okay, interesting. And the teachers' unions are okay with that?
It's just a recommendation. They can't make them do it.
Exactly. It's a recommendation, and it's viewed as one of the supports. So where they might say, yes, you need to have this PD, it's also viewed as just another support for the teacher.
Okay, good. Well, good. It's good that it's framed that the teacher has some choice or some autonomy in the conversation about how they get their support. That's good. How about time is provided to coaches and mentors? It looks like we're split here, half and half, between sometimes and always, and one person never. Obviously, time is a commodity when you're teaching. Some people have release days on Wednesdays or short day, 1 day a week, and they can use that as a time to work with a coach in a coach and mentor situation. Or it has to occur before school, after school, lunchtime. Or if you have an instructional coach, perhaps you can work out a situation where they come into your classroom and spend time with you there. So it probably varies a great deal. I think a more interesting conversation to be had is the financial resources part. I see that sometimes, it looks like 7 of you say sometimes financial resources are committed to coaching. 11 of you say always. That's roughly about 2/3. There are some things occurring now at the state level, and I know probably many of you are aware that your districts received a lot of money for professional development, right? And I'm going to actually show you the policy statement and legislation around that money, and so that you're informed as to that, what exactly that money should be used for. How about a high turnover rate of teachers? It looks like 7 of you said you have a high turnover rate. 11 of you said you don't have a high turnover rate. Of the 7 of you who said yes, are you in, what's your demographic? Or just say what,
Well, I said no, but it's kind of tricky because in high school we do have a high turnover rate, especially in the specialized fields like math and science. It's really hard to find those qualified teachers. And when we do find teachers in those areas, we're oftentimes finding that they look qualified on paper, but then they're actually not. So then they're not reelected.
Uh-huh. So they don't have the pedagogical knowledge of teaching mathematics. Maybe they were a math major and they took a lot of math classes, but sometimes it has to do with the ability to teach the subject, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyone want to share if they're in an area where you have had a high turnover, what you think the factors might be?
I marked yes on that, and being in Vallejo, we have a very high turnover of teachers. And I think a lot of it has to do with working conditions, not so much pay, but working conditions and support that they're given. Even though we have the BITSA program, it doesn't seem like there's any other types of support for them. So that's just my guess, though.
Any other different ideas?
I marked yes. I'm in Fairfield Sassoon, and just being in HRIC, I think it's a lot of turnover, but I think it's often the result of what Michelle was saying with the folks who are recommended for a non-reelect for the next year. And we also last year offered a retirement incentive, which contributes to turnover, but not of new teachers, of course. But, so then I think a lot of times with new teachers, now that we're in the teacher shortage, we have people on short-term staff permits who didn't follow through with their action plans to get into a program, and so we're going to see high turnover this year as well, simply because they don't have a credential to fall back on for next year.
Right. It's a really good point, and we seem to be hiring more and more PIP and STIP qualified teachers, although they're really not qualified teachers. And, when we resort to doing that, we sometimes realize that without any teacher preparation, they're not going to be very successful unless they get a tremendous amount of support, which leads to this question at the end, which is new teachers express the need for more support. Most of you said 72% said yes. And we know that even though we have programs like BITSA in place, they're still not strong enough to support all teachers. Some teachers need more than just a weekly meeting with their support provider.
Well, Dawn, it's interesting because it's kind of a catch-22, because if you hire a PIP or a STIP, they don't qualify for BITSA with being a PIP or a STIP, at least for us. And then also with being an intern, if we hire interns, you can, but not a PIP or a STIP. So they end up not getting the support they need.
And in our district, we've recently hired a bunch of support providers specifically to assist our short-term staff permits, our PIPs, our waivers. Interns, of course, are supposed to be assigned a site, what am I trying to say, a supervisor from their university, and then also someone in the district. So we view them as sort of already having that support, but our STIPs and PIPs were critical in needing that. So we did recently hire a bunch, and I think we threw out, it's like a $2,000 stipend per teacher that the support provider takes on, and they can take on up to 3. So there's some incentive there for the support provider as well.
Great, and thank you for sharing that, because it leads perfectly into this next slide. We sometimes believe that we don't have the resources to support teachers, especially when they don't fit a category. So if a teacher's a new teacher and they're not clearing their credential, they're not a preliminary credential holder that's trying to get a clear credential, and they don't qualify for BITSA, or our contracts don't talk about how we support teachers who don't fit a category. So a STIP teacher or a PIP teacher, or a waiver teacher, a teacher who's teaching a subject area they've never taught before because the school district board decides that they're going to offer them a waiver, because school boards can do that. So we have this interesting situation with what do we do in this time when we have all these teachers entering the profession? The statistics are quite foreboding. We're issuing more and more STIP and PIP credentials than ever before. We have more and more intern teachers entering classrooms. They're really underprepared teachers. And we struggle with retention, because retention now is attrition for teachers is about 17% now. About 1 in 5 teachers leave the classroom after entering it within 5 to 7 years. So we still have this problem. The state's solution was based upon several reports, and I'll share some information with you about where you can read more about this topic. The state has come through with a tremendous amount of money. $490 million in one-time funds for school districts to use to support educator effectiveness. And this money is actually tied to a federal report that California had to provide to the feds at the Department of Education, saying that they will do more to increase teacher effectiveness, because as a state, California, obviously we have a lot of challenges with funding, but we also have a lot of diversity, and we have a lot of other factors that contribute to why teachers do not stay in the classroom. So the state government is acting upon that in response to demands from the federal government, who is saying you need to help solve this problem. So that money that's been received by your school districts, and by the way, they are getting it now, or they already have it, they should be using that money to support any beginning teacher. But that money can also be used to support any administrator who needs coaching or support to help beginning teachers. And one of the most interesting reports that I read recently, and I'll try to get these into your folder. They're pretty long, and I don't know if you want to read them all, but they talk about how when teachers exit the profession, new teachers who've been teaching for less than 5 years, and they ask them, what caused you to leave the profession? Many of them don't say, the kids were difficult, I didn't get enough pay, it was too much time commitment. Many of their comments have to do with poor administrative support. They don't feel supported when they're a teacher. And that is something that we need to address, especially in this, as you know, when we're thinking about training administrators, like in a program like this, but we also need to address it with our administrators and providing them with the skills and the training that they need to be more effective in their interactions with teachers and how they coach them and how they support them. So there's a lot of great information about this right now. It's a lot of, as you read it, it kind of makes you feel uncomfortable, because we know that this is an area where administrators struggle, because there's not always enough time to have quality interactions with teachers, let alone have time to devote to new teachers who need your support. The other challenge that we sometimes discover is that our administrators are not the best people to be coaching teachers. Sometimes they don't have any grade level experience or even grade span experience at a certain area where they might be a principal in an elementary school and they taught secondary Spanish. So, you know, that's not a great match for coaching someone if you haven't taught the content that they've taught. So things that we need to be aware of about how we support teachers. Sometimes cognitive coaching, training people on how to be cognitive coaches. Sometimes BITSA has kind of mixed reviews in the world of induction. You know, for some people it's fine, for some people it's not enough. A lot of our teacher candidates, when they exit BITSA programs, are just so thankful to be done that they are just pleased that they got through it and they clear their credential and they're good. But then when they reflect back, or when they think back a few years later, they realize they didn't get the training or the skills that they needed. And that's not BITSA's fault. It's just one of those things that we need to really build our induction programs in a different way so that they actually support our teachers, all teachers. I'll tell you a little bit about cognitive apprenticeship, and then perhaps we'll have time. I don't think we're going to run short on time. We may need to continue the conversation in our next class. One great model that I think I added something into your folder is a paper that I wrote on the topic of cognitive apprenticeship. You can read more about it. It's a much more elaborate model for coaching and supporting teachers. It's really based on mentorship and not just based upon coaching. It involves modeling, coaching, scaffolding, giving people a chance to articulate what they've learned, then engaging in reflection, and then encouraging them to explore that even further. So it's a much more elaborate process. It's based upon a reciprocal model that occurs between the person coaching them, whether they call them a coach or a mentor, and the teacher. And they become essentially partners in the collaboration. It's almost like engaging in action research with your teacher that you're supporting. So that's one model that's been very successful. This is more detail about what it looks like, and there is a document in your folder if you want to read more about that. It goes into more detail about what cognitive apprenticeship models look like. Cognitive apprenticeship model, by the way, was discovered by a teacher, and she used this model in her classroom for teaching her students. And it became so popular that there was another researcher that started doing research on the model and actually developed it into a conceptual framework for teaching and for supporting people, supporting teachers or students. There are other models of how we support teachers. Mertz has created a hierarchy. When we think about how we approach new teachers through modeling, through coaching and mentoring, we think about our roles that we play with that person. Are we their peer pal or supporter? That's the lowest level of support we can really offer a teacher, is a peer pal or just someone who's going to be their supporter. If we're coaching them, if we're actually having conversations about content, about practice, then we move up a notch. If we're guiding them or counseling them or advising them, we move up a higher level. If we become their sponsor or benefactor, we're actually really concerned about their success, and we approach our job in that manner. So we're really invested in that person becoming very successful. Then we move it up a notch. Again, when we become protector of them, and I've seen actually many teachers who have engaged in mentoring who become very protective of their candidates. And that's really even a higher level of the hierarchy. And then when we reach that very, very top pinnacle, we are actually a mentor, because mentoring really encompasses all of these things. There is a document that just recently came out. It was actually towards the end of last year, about teacher induction programs in California. And this was the document that the state of California had to submit to the federal government. And just a snippet from that, I pulled several things out of various plans and things. We really need to look at teacher induction in the state of California. And it's something that will make or break the next generation of teachers. Because right now, at the rate that we're going with all of the hires of the PIPs, the STIPs, and the interns, we're really under preparing our workforce. And unless we come back with a really strong induction program for these teachers, we're going to continue to see this endless exiting of the profession that we're seeing right now. I think in California, I think I read it was up to 17%. In some places, it's as high as 25%. So when you figure we lose about 1 out of 5 teachers within 5 years, and we have retirements, and we have so many new incoming students that we can't quite keep up with the demand. In some places, it's as high as 1 in 4 teachers, which is concerning, very concerning. So we need to look at the accreditation systems. We need to look at the standards that we expect of these teachers, and we need to look more closely at what we're doing for them in the classroom. There's actually some theory that's related to this relationship in induction. It's called the mutual benefits model. And it's like a understanding the relationship between the mentor and the mentee and the benefit of that relationship, and how to develop that relationship in a way that's going to make increase the likelihood that that teacher is going to be so benefited by that exchange of practice that they're going to want to stay in the profession. It's really, really important that we understand that. not just looking at induction as, okay, here are the things you need to do to clear your credential. We need to kind of approach it more of, from a perspective of what do we need to do for you in order to help you want to stay in the profession. So anyway, there's a lot of theory here. And again, I know we're running out of time, and I want to get to the last item, so I'm glossing over this, but you can read this more in depth. If you have an interest in theory, you can actually look up some of the theories related to induction and how we develop induction programs. This particular article, I was reading it just the other day, is probably the most comprehensive review of induction I've ever seen. It's not a meta-analysis for those of you who might be familiar with that idea. It is actually a review of the empirical studies. So it's actually the results of what transpired when we actually tried to measure induction programs and the relationship between the teacher and the mentor. So it was very, very interesting reading if you choose to read it. And then we need to think about mentoring more from the perspective of personal guidance. We think about coaching, we think about BITSA. We're very careful to call BITSA support providers and not mentors. Just like we don't want to label them as something like a mentor. We really need to rethink that, because until we can get to that place where those BITSA support providers need to be our strongest, most capable mentors. And those are the people that will most likely be able to keep new teachers in the profession. And we need to treat that as a job in and of itself, just like we do instructional coaches, right? It's a role that needs to really be carefully considered. So again, I don't think we'll have time for a group discussion, but perhaps you can think a little bit more about the roles of coaching and mentoring that you've been familiar with in your experiences as a teacher or as a coach or administrator. Do you think one was particularly better than others? And did the model that you were using fit your organization? A lot of times we do things because we have to do them. So with BITSA, using BITSA as an example, we put teachers in BITSA support programs because we need to, because it's required in order for them to clear their credentials. Induction is required in the state of California. So we do that just because it's what we have access to. But is it ideally the best way to train a teacher? And for all of you who get your admin credential, the law is going to change, or actually I think it changed in July of last year or the beginning of this year. So when you go to clear your administrative credential, you will go through 2 years of mentoring. It will not be take 3 classes and you're done. It's all changed to a mentorship model. And that's the same model we really need to be thinking about for teachers. So as you approach your last assignment for this course, and I know it's the last thing you want to hear about right now because you're still thinking about the other ones, but I want you to be thinking about, okay, so I have to write a paper on mentoring and supervision. First of all, think about those 2 words, mentoring and supervision. Are they similar or are they different? Based upon the things that I've shared with you today, when you think about cognitive coaching and induction and the other coaching models that you might be familiar with, like BITSA, are they really about mentoring or are they about supervision, and how do they overlap? There are no rules that say a principal cannot engage in a cognitive coaching relationship with a teacher. There are no rules about that at all. So the path that an administrator takes in developing their skills around mentoring is very much up to them. There's not a lot of training provided to you as administrators to do that. It will be up to you to decide how you're going to develop your mentoring and coaching skills. So be thinking about that as you write this paper. I have a list of questions here. Most of them are about clinical supervision. They were questions that were actually developed when I started teaching this class, and I haven't really changed them because part of this course requires that you be exposed to clinical supervision. I don't want to take the weight away from clinical supervision. I think it's very important. You need to develop the skills to be able to evaluate a teacher and to provide feedback. But I want you to also think about, in your role as a supervisor, can you also be a mentor? And how do you go about doing that? So as you read through this list of questions, some of them are broad, who should supervise? Should a principal be the supervisor of their teachers? Perhaps it should be that way, perhaps it shouldn't. Perhaps there's a better model out there. Perhaps you have ideas about that model. There's no right or wrong answer here. I'm just interested in your thinking. What skills, attitudes, knowledge, and values are possessed by successful supervisors? A supervisor being someone who oversees other people. It could be a principal, it could be a district administrator, it could be anyone. What are the most important needs of teachers, new teachers and experienced teachers? Do they have some common needs that you could talk about? Or are new teachers very different from veteran teachers? I mentioned autonomy. Give that some thought as well. What makes for positive relationships between supervisors and teachers? What types of activities should be part of instructional supervision? What is the relationship between professional development and effective supervision? And that you probably will be able to answer based upon what you wrote in your professional development plans. And what works and what should be changed regarding current practices of instructional supervision that you have experienced? Maybe you have really have had good experiences in your school district. Perhaps maybe you have not had such good experiences and you want to talk about that a little bit. So be thinking about this as you write this paper. Again, this is a reflection paper. I don't expect anyone to go out and research 7 or 10 studies on supervision or mentoring and then provide me with a summary of what those models are. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for you to reflect on this topic. And as you reflect on it, use the information that I've shared with you or reading that you've done to form your opinions and your beliefs about instructional supervision. Any questions or thoughts about the last assignment?
John, just a quick question.
Sure.
So we have the PD plan as well as the signature assignment due last day of class. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Perfect. Okay.
And this PowerPoint will be available on Edmodo, so if we wanted to reference this last page, it'll be available.
Yes, after we finish here, I'm going to put some more documents. I'll put them in the Session 5 folder. I also noticed that some of the studies that I put in there for you to look at, if you choose to, are not opening either. So, and all of these are in different formats. Some are PDF, some are Word, some are, I'm not quite sure what's going on with Edmodo, but I'll go back and check all of them to make sure that they're working, and I'll get information in there for you to look at as well, okay?
So for this mentoring and supervision paper, the research that we could do would be the stuff that you're putting into the folder for class, not necessarily that you're expecting us to go out and find other sources then.
No, at this point in time, you have a lot on your plate. I know you're all busy researching and reading and synthesizing a lot of information. And, I'll be very honest with you. This is what graduate level work is. I also want to point out that as a school administrator, whether you're a principal or a district level administrator, you're going to be living in this world all the time where you don't have an answer to a question, or you have to go out and find information, or you have to come up with the best possible response that you can based upon your sources. So I know it's challenging. I know there's a time crunch here, and that makes it even harder. But synthesize, read through. Try to form connections between what you've been doing with your PD plans and responding to this last question. Because again, if we go back to the very beginning of the PowerPoint, we talked about this session was really all about professional development and learning. And there are really important connections between mentoring, supervision, and professional development. Okay? So they're all connected. So use your sources. Don't feel like you're repeating yourself. If you feel strongly about something, incorporate that into your paper as well.
Dawn, the reflection paper, the supervision and mentoring paper, can that be in first person because you're asking for our thoughts?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is really very much a reflection of what you've been thinking about and what we've been talking about. So please incorporate your own thoughts and ideas. Okay, you're awfully quiet. I guess there aren't any more questions. You're all thinking about the game, right?
Thanks, Don.
Okay, everyone. Have a great afternoon. Email me or Edmodo me if you have questions, and I'll try to get back to you as quickly as I can.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Don. Bye, all.
Bye, all.